Greetings, everybody. This is Samuel C. at Graph1159 on X and Blue Sky. That's at GRAPH1159. I'm continuing my video series on the Apostle Paul's epistle of 2 Corinthians. This video is on chapter 10. Now I, Paul, myself am entreating you, through the meekness and leniency of Christ, who, as to personal appearance, indeed, am humble among you, yet being absent have courage toward you. Yet I am beseeching, that I may not, being present, have to have courage with the confidence with which I am reckoning to dare any who reckon us as walking according to the flesh. For walking in flesh, we are not warring according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not fleshly, but powerful to God toward the pulling down of bulwarks, pulling down reckonings and every height elevating itself against the knowledge of God, and leading into captivity every apprehension into the obedience of Christ. So, Paul is saying that when he's absent, when he's not with the Corinthians and he writes to them, he sounds very confident, but yet when he's with them, he seems meek, and he thinks that that is by God's design, that Paul knows that in and of himself he can't do anything, and he doesn't want to give the impression when he's with the Corinthians that he is confident in and of himself. But yet, when he feels inspired to write something, then he can write something very powerful, knowing that ultimately it's of God, but not of himself. And he then, talks about pulling down reckonings and every height elevating itself against the knowledge of God, and leading into captivity every apprehension into the obedience of Christ. So he's making a contrast between an attitude of arrogance and thinking that in and of ourselves we know things or can do things independent of God, versus bringing all of our apprehensions into submission, all of our thoughts, ambitions, desires, just submitting all of this to Christ for Him to work with, to accomplish His will for us. And then verse 6, and having all in readiness to avenge every disobedience, whenever your obedience may be completed. And so as God brings us into what He's called us to do, then we can point out in subjection when we see it. Verse 7, are you looking at that on the surface? If anyone is presuming to have confidence in himself to be Christ's, let him be reckoning this again with himself, that according as he is Christ's, thus also are we. For if ever I, besides, should also be boasting somewhat more excessively concerning our authority, which the Lord gives us for building you up and not for pulling you down, I shall not be put to shame, lest I should seem as ever terrifying you through epistles, seeing that he is averring, his epistles indeed are weighty and strong, yet his bodily presence is weak, and his expression to be scorned. Let such a one be reckoning this, that such as we are in word through epistles being absent, such also being present are we in act. For we are not daring to judge ourselves by or compare ourselves with some who are commending themselves, but they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves with themselves, do not understand. So we're not commending ourselves. Paul is not commending himself because he knows that he can't do anything without God. So if other people are commending themselves, well, we don't have to measure ourselves against them and their standards or their ideals. Verse 13, now we shall not be boasting immeasurably, but according to the measure of our range, which measure God parts to us, to reach on as far as you also. For it is not as though, not reaching on to you, we are overstretching ourselves. For we outstrip others even as far as you in the evangel of Christ, not boasting immeasurably in others' toils, yet having the expectation, your faith growing to be magnified among you superabundantly, according to our range, so as to bring the evangel beyond you, not to boast in another's range over that which is ready. Now he who is boasting in the Lord, let him be boasting. For not he who is commending himself is qualified, but whom the Lord is commending. So God gave Paul this ministry to the Corinthians. He brought them into the faith. He helped them mature in the faith. But Paul cannot do this with everybody. He doesn't have the inherent ability to do it. God gave him the assignment with um, certain people, including the Corinthians, and but Paul doesn't have the ability to minister beyond the assignment that God has given him. And so that's why Paul is not commending himself in the fact that he accomplished something great with the Corinthians. He's giving the credit to God. And then when Paul, wrote about how his apparently uh, either he had heard or he suspected that his epistles may be seen as terrifying. But Paul, in and of himself, doesn't want to terrify anybody. If that's the vibe that people got from his writing, well, it's ultimately because in a particular situation, in a particular moment, God inspired him to write that way, but it's not of him. That wasn't of his ambition, uh, and and that's the theme. Really, that's the theme of this whole epistle of Second Corinthians that we've seen thus far. Uh, Paul wants for people to know that everything that he's able to do is because of God, and so that people won't think that he's an overbearing person. That seems to be the criticism that he was always perceiving. People think he's overbearing, that he's taking advantage of people or trying to insert himself as an authority over people. And apparently that perception was out there, but Paul keeps saying over and over again, anything that I'm doing is because it's God who enabled me to do it and not of myself. So that concludes my discussion on chapter 10. I'll see you next time when we look at chapter 11.